The story takes place in the United States in 1999. John accidentally found his father's old radio. He thought no one would ever use it again. But that day, another voice came on the radio. He chats with him and finds out that he lives on Queen Street, and they both liked baseball. The conversation turned to the World Cup 30 years ago. John was able to tell him the exact result of the game, which made the other guy wonder. The game hadn't even started yet. The communication was cut off. The initial conversation between the two men ended. The man on the other end got up to go to bed. He accidentally bumped into the door frame. A crack appeared in the glass when he hit it. At the same time, John's house had a crack in the same spot. When the next night came, John had just arrived home when he heard a man's voice on the radio. He went over to the radio. The man asked him how he knew, because today's game turned out to be exactly the same as John's last night. John laughed and replied that it was 30 years ago. They thought John was joking, so he asked him about the next day's results. John told him everything. At this point, he didn't realize anything was wrong. It wasn't until he heard him call his son Captain. John realized something was wrong, because his dad called him Captain. So he asked him his name. When he heard that he had the same name as his father, John froze. Same name, same Queens. Was it really his dead father? So he gave him his information. He told him a little secret that only he and his dad knew. This time he panicked. He accidentally set fire to his shoes on the table, and John's side of the table had a burn mark on it. John said excitedly that you burnt the table and I saw it. We'll call Dad old John for now. He thinks he's being watched. Warned John to stay away from his family, but John's eyes were already tearing up with emotion. He told old John that you were going to die in the Basildon Fair on the 12th of October 1969, and that's tomorrow. And he told old John, you've always gone with your instincts. Tomorrow you're not going to die if you make a choice and go the other way. The call was cut off again. When the time came for the next day, John was watching the game with a heavy heart. Then the alarm went off. On the way to the fire scene, the results of the game on the radio were exactly what John had told him last night. And when he arrived at the scene, he realized that the letters painted on the wall were the Basildon Bin Company, and it had been abandoned for a long time. All that was needed was water to put out the fire. But a girl came crying, saying her sister was still on the roof. Old John had no choice but to lead a rescue mission. But the fire was getting bigger and bigger. The wooden stairs were burned. John told his partner to leave. He went in alone. After searching, he found the unconscious girl. Then he smashed the glass and tried to get out through the window with the ladder. But the ladder malfunctioned. He had to find another way out. But as he carried the girl towards the smoke-filled corridor, John's words from last night kept coming back to him. He turned back to the other tunnel, and it was his decision. John, who had been waiting anxiously in 1999, had a lot of memories of his father in his head. Not only did he have a full childhood, his dad even came to his employment ceremony. He asked his friends about it in disbelief, and their memories of John's dad had changed. They remembered that he had died of lung cancer 10 years earlier, not in a fire. The point is they only have this latest memory. When John rushed home anxiously, there were many more pictures of Dad in the house, and there was a line on the table that said, "I'm still the captain." That's what Dad had carved with a soldering iron in another time. After that, the two of them talked to each other on the radio again. Only this time, they were less rusty than the previous two times. They both accepted each other's presence. This time they talked about everything. They talked about family and work. John also told his father about the World Cup results in advance. He also told him not to smoke. When the conversation ended, John left a message for his mum. He told her to come over and fell asleep. But he had a strange dream. He was at a funeral, and he was crying his eyes out. When he woke up, he called his mum first, but the call that was working before he went to bed, but the number of the fast food restaurant. John was baffled. When John arrived at the police station the next day, he was dumbfounded by what his colleagues had to say. A skeleton they dug up the other day, identified as a victim of the Nightingale serial murders, said it was the 10th victim. It was a shock to John. He remembered only 3 victims, but his colleague just brought in a pile of information. It was the 10th victim, and to John's dismay, he saw his mum in the file. So John went home and radioed his dad. He told him the news. Then he asked him what he'd done last night. When he heard that Dad had gone to the hospital to see Mum, John knew what the problem was. The normal course of events. Dad died in a fire yesterday. Mum shouldn't have been at the hospital, but now he's alive because of his presence. So Mum's still working. And in the normal course of events, the murderer hadn't done anything since he killed the 3 girls. But now because of their change, the killer had killed 10 people. It made John feel guilty, and now he had to stop it. He didn't know know who the killer was, but he did know the killer's next target. He told his father about the next victim, to find the girl and protect her. The next day John got the news at the police station. The freshly dug up skeleton had been identified as a girl who had disappeared on 16th of April 1968, which meant he wasn't the 10th victim but the first. But then, when John was ready to sort out the information, John realized that the girl who was supposed to have been killed last night had disappeared into thin air, which meant that Dad had saved the girl last night. When he got home at night, he told him the good news. He also told him about the next victim. But when Dad found the girl this time, something unexpected happened. He watched the girl until she got off work. He went to the bathroom while she was getting changed. He was attacked in the bathroom. He asked John why he was following him. That's when he realized he was the killer. The two of them got into a fist fight, but as a firefighter, John was no match for him. Not only was he knocked unconscious, but he took his driver's license. If it hadn't been for the toilet, John's life would have been in jeopardy. When John woke up again, he rushed to the girl's place. But he was too late. The girl had already been killed. He went back to tell John the news, suggesting that the killer would probably take revenge on his family, because the killer took his driver's license, which had a home address on it. That's when John got to the point. The killer touched Dad's wallet, which means the killer's fingerprints would be on the wallet. Then he told Dad to seal the wallet, put it in a place where no one would find it for 30 years, which means that as soon as Dad put the wallet away, John, on the other hand, got his hands on this dusty piece of evidence. He rushed to the police station to get his fingerprints checked. But when the results came back, John was shocked. The killer was a cop. He drove straight to the killer's house. We have to say something here. John had been here before. It's close to where the first victim was buried. John had come here to investigate. Only the old couple were here, but the son was killed in the line of duty as a policeman. But this time, one of them is missing but the son is alive and well. By way of a sidebar, John got the killer's current location. Then he found the murderer alone. John confessed that he already knew about the murder, but the former policeman is not so calm. He said he wanted John to prove it. It was John's irrational behavior that nearly led to his next big mistake. When he got back, he contacted his dad again. He told him all about the murderer. He told him how to get help from the police. While he was talking, his dad's best friend from the police came to the door, because they found John's driver's license in the house of the girl who died last night. And there were witnesses who confirmed that John had broken into the dead girl's room. Now they need John to come back to the station. During their tussle, they accidentally touched the radio on the table. The future connected device fell to the floor and went up in smoke. At the police station, John told his friend Jack about the murderer, and that he was talking to his son 30 years later. But who would believe that? All he got was a blank stare from his best friend. And to confirm his story, John predicted the outcome of today's World Cup match. He even told us what would happen on the pitch. John's wife also came to see him. To avoid suspicion, Jack took her to the cafe outside the police station. And when he left, old John had a bad day at the station. The murderer came after him. He threatened him with a gun, asked him how he knew his target. Luckily, the killer was interrupted when someone opened the door. It bought John some time. He knew the killer would come back. Then he took a look around the house and ripped out the wires to the exhaust fan, made a simple electrical conductor, tied one to the doorknob and the other to the electrical box. Pour coffee on the floor in front of the door. Wait for the killer to arrive with the fuse in hand. The moment the murderer entered, old John dropped the cord. The killer was instantly electrocuted. He pulled out the killer's wallet to check his address. Then he set off the fire alarm. The police station was in a state of chaos, and John escapes from the police station. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, Jack was frozen. The results of the game on the TV were exactly the same as what John had just told him. Even the embarrassing stories on the pitch were exactly the same. Old John left the police station and went to the murderer's house. According to his son, the murderer liked to collect the dead man's belongings. If he found them, he could be convicted. But when old John opened a box and saw that it was full of women's jewelry, the killer came back. The killer had a gun with only 2 legs. He had to jump out the window, and the killer was right behind him. Just as they were leaving, Jack arrived with his men. He saw the dead man's belongings scattered all over the place. The killer followed them to an abandoned dock, but there was no sign of old John. Just as he was about to leave, a hand suddenly reached out from under his feet and pulled him into the water. The two of them were fighting in the water in no time at all. But the water was old John's strength. The killer was no match for him. The killer was no match for him. He sank to the bottom in a matter of seconds. As John struggled to get to sure. Jack arrived with his men. Strangely enough, the killer's body was never found. Old John was acquitted that night. First he fixed the radio, then he contacted John. He told him the killer was dead. They stopped the killer. But John didn't feel right, because Mum wasn't in the photo. As they were talking, they were both attacked at the same time. One is the murderer from 30 years ago, and one 30 years later. John, being young, was able to fight the murderer. On the other side, old John was knocked unconscious and handcuffed. Luckily, the gunfire from John's side kept coming, and his wife's cries for help woke him up. He managed to unlock the handcuffs by hooking his foot to a tool on the table and grabbed the shotgun. But then the killer took little John hostage and made him drop the gun. The moment he did, his wife jumped at him. The wife suddenly jumped on the murderer. This gave little John time to escape. When the murderer was ready to continue capturing little John, John shot him in the hand. This shot also saved John in 1999, because he was already subdued. But the killer's hand suddenly disappeared, followed by a sudden change in the decor of the house. With a single gunshot, the killer of 30 years later died instantly. John looked back. It was his dad who was supposed to be dying of cancer. Looks like Dad really did quit smoking. At the end of the story, John's family is there, and he used it to his advantage. He's used the opportunity to change the fate of his family. Now that the mood has been set, I'd like to ask, if you are in front of the screen, you had a chance like this, what would you do?